The Alpine region has a very rich textile heritage. It is the place where the textile industry of the central part of Europe began to be built. Knowledge about textile heritage could today help us in the transformation of both textile production and the attitude towards textiles, first of all at the local level, thus contributing to the shift more broadly, as textile production is one of the most environmentally burdensome branches of industry. Part of the activities of the AlpTextyles project was therefore to research, map, and gather information about the rich textile heritage of Alpine region and the knowledge, know-hows and ideas that have stood the test of time.
Although researchers, historians, geographers, economists, anthropologists, ethnologists and others have long studied various aspects of the development of textile production in this area, the knowledge about Alpine textile heritage, traditions and history of textile production is fragmented at the local, regional and national levels, making it difficult to easily provide an overview of the whole Alpine level. Based on secondary sources, and with the help of project partners, Research Centre of the Slovenian Academy of Sciences and Arts researched production and use of textiles in the past, traditions and current practices related to textile production in the Alpine area to provide an initial understanding of the local textile heritage, focusing on specific fibres such as wool, flax and silk, and aspects of living heritage and traditional costumes. All the findings are summarised in a book entitled Alpine Textile Heritage, an overview, which can be downloaded here. Archaeological findings already from prehistorical times tell us about widespread textile production throughout the Alpine region, based on natural fibres such as wool, flax and nettle. The early Alpine communities produced textiles using various techniques, including spinning, weaving and braiding, and studies show that the basic techniques to obtain natural fibres has not changed much since then. Archaeological researches testify to the fact that in this part of Europe, due to favourable natural conditions in some parts such as Po Valley or the foothills near Hallstatt in Austria, a more complex system of wool and flax production started to evolve, and that the regional value chains were quickly established, as shown by the data of one of such alliances, the connection between weavers of Magdalensburg in Austria and merchants from Aquileia in Italy that was present in antique times. These more or less wide regional chains can then be traced throughout history, and on this premise, larger textile centres were also created over time. One of such centres of wool textile production, starts of which can be traced back to Roman times, is Biella. Through the history, this Italian city became one of biggest centres of textile production, so much so that in the 19th century it was labelled as the Manchester of Italy. And even today, around 40% of all high-quality woolen fabrics in the world are still produced in Biella. We cannot go on without mentioning Lyon, which was the capital of the European silk trade in the 16th century, at a time when its silk production even surpassed that of China, or the Como district, whose heritage of silk textile production is still very much present, as it remains the region where 70% of European silk is produced today. But next to the strong centres of textile production, which had a geographically wide value chain, there was at the same time another level, completely local, which existed due to the self-sufficiency needs of the farmers, of rural population. Household flax cultivation, a tradition that developed in parts of the Alpine region and remained present till the beginning of the 20th century, dates back at least to the end of the 8th century, when French King Charlemagne issued a decree requiring all households to grow flax and weave their linen. Production was a family affair. Clothing, bed linen and textiles were made at home. Until the middle of the 20th century, as in some parts of rural area of the Slovenian Pohoria, people still wove homemade cloth, and the fuelers, special craftsmen, then further processed this fabric into loden. The textile self-sufficiency of the peasant population began to decrease drastically with the Industrial Revolution, when industrially made fabrics, especially cotton fabrics, became widely available and affordable, which can also be seen in the transformation of folk costumes and clothing of peasants in the middle of 19th century, in some areas even earlier. The idea of sustainability and circularity was deeply embedded in textile production in rural areas of Alpine regions. Data from the 17th century show that there were more sheep than cattle in the entire Alpine region, and that sheep farming in some areas even began to increase in the 18th century. But sheep were often bred not only for wool, but also for meat and milk, and the use of wool for textile purposes was the only logical use, especially considering its properties that, processed for clothing purposes, protected people from the harsh climate of the Alpine region. Today, wool, especially local wool, is slowly gaining popularity again, and local breeds of sheep, such as, for example, Montafona stone sheep or Jezersko Solčava sheep, which was threatened with extinction a few years ago, helps to preserve the biodiversity of the Alpine environment. From the second half of the 19th century, the widespread introduction of mechanical aids at various stages of textile production triggered a process of innovation that had profound impacts on textile production in the Alpine region. During this period, industrial architecture emerged in the Alpine region, with some structures designed for specific stages of the textile process, others for multiple stages of the production chain, and still others for the entire textile production cycle, particularly for wool and cotton. Some places became through history important centres of textile production at the time, such as Gandino, a side valley of the Seriana Valley in the province of Bergamo in Italy, where the earliest data on the processing of wool dates back to the 11th century. An indigenous local breed, the large-sized Bergamo sheep, was at the base of local textile production. With industrialization and globalization of markets, already at the end of the 19th century, imported wool from Australia and South America began to compete with domestic wool. While the Gandino Valley remained a vital industrial area, the value chain was no longer entirely local. Production relied on local and imported wool from other parts of Italy, and even parts of Europe such as Hungary, Russia, and even as far as Australia. Some areas were not so lucky to transform and retain production. One of such was Škofja Loka area in Slovenia, which was at one point in history an important area of flax production not only regionally, but at the European scale. During the latter half of the 19th century, however, the leading Slovenian producer of linen for sales in Europe faced challenges in competing with imported linen from today's Czech regions of Bohemia and Moravia. These regions had developed their technology and tools for linen production, which meant that imported linen was softer, more evenly woven, and cheaper than the local product. In addition, the growing popularity of cotton fabrics led to a decline in demand for linen, which in turn contributed to the decline in flax cultivation in Škofja Loka and nearby area. The disruption of Alpine textile value chains is therefore not a recent phenomenon. Today, however, small farmers hardly have the possibility of conferring their wool to industrial producers. There are no smaller-scale wool washers or spinning mills. The flax-linen value chains is in a worse state in the Alps. We have wool in the Alps, but very limited flax production, and the other stages of the value chains are almost non-existent. These few examples that were highlighted demonstrate how the natural resources and distinct geographical features of the Alps contribute to the localization of specific industries and the preservation of traditional craftsmanship. Examining production, distribution, and textile usage unveils the distinctiveness and connections distinctive to the Alpine region, providing at the same time a lens to explore the rich diversity of traditions and knowledge within the textile past of the Alps and their present value chains. The goal of this research was to unravel the rich tapestry of textile traditions, innovations, and the intricate relationships between natural and social dynamics in the Alpine space.